Listen.
Welcome to Real Deal, Real Deal, Real Deal, Real Deal, Real Deal. Joining me today are the happy pair. Welcome to Real Welcome to Real Deal. I am Brian Rose, and we are live here at London Real Studios to talk about knife crime and to talk about the 100 teenager that's been murdered on our streets under the term of the current mayor. This is a very serious topic, and I'm going to be looking for your input today and your thoughts via all the live comments, and I want to talk you through what I've discovered and what I now think about the current situation of knife crime in this city, also our rising crime rate overall, and now the fact that our current mayor is defunding the police, which means this problem is going to get worse unless we find a solution and find new leadership. This is a very sensitive topic, and to be honest with you, the more and more I've done research on this, the more it's been hard to learn the facts and to see these images and to know how much we have been failed as a population in this city of London. Knife crime is currently at nightmare proportions. It's at an all-time high, and it's all because of the inaction of our current mayor, and it's teenagers killing each other in the streets. And if this doesn't say something about our leadership or who we are as a population, then I don't know what does. And so I want to talk seriously today about problems. I also want to give you numbers and statistics, and I want to give you solutions, because that's what I plan to do as your next mayor of London. And I plan and I will reduce knife crime in this city. So today I want to talk about three major topics. First of all, I want to go into detail about what is exactly happening on the streets with knife crime and teenage knife crime. The statistics are very sobering and shocking, but I want to share them with you so you can know where we're at today. Secondly, I want to show you how violent crime overall in London is also skyrocketing and what the ramifications are of that. And finally, I want to show you how our mayor is trying to defund the police currently, right now, with the latest budget. And I want to show you how that's going to impact all of us and, of course, knife and violent crime as well. And finally, I want to introduce my policy to make London safe again, to reduce knife crime, to reduce overall crime, to support the Met Police, to support community-led strategies to prevent these crimes in the first place, to really think about how these even start to happen. And I want to share with you some of my ideas on that. Before we get started, I just want to say that today marks the 20th anniversary of the murder of the 10-year-old boy, Damilola Taylor. And he was walking home from school in London 20 years ago today, and he was knifed to death by a group of teenagers. And this was a seminal moment here in the United Kingdom because it showed the entire country how serious this issue was. It woke everyone up, and it's shocking to me, and it's repugnant to me that 20 years later, we are now in a worse situation because of your current mayor of London and the leadership. So I want to send out support to his family. There's been some incredible work done around him and the foundation, and we need to continue pushing this message because knife crime, it's a tragedy, and it reflects poorly upon all of us, all the 9 million citizens of London. The fact that we tolerate and allow this to happen in our very own streets to our very own children from the leaders that we elect, it's not acceptable, and that's one of the things I want to say today. And I want to make sure our current mayor gets this message along with our leaders in Parliament as well. This is a serious issue and it needs addressing right now. Before we get started, I want to get your thoughts because this is all of us. This is our city. These are our families. These are our children. And I want to hear from you. I want to get your perspectives on how we can solve this problem and what you're seeing in your streets when it comes to knife crime and violent crime and the lack of policing in London. So first, answer this question. Do you fear knife crime and why? I want to hear this from the teenagers all the way up to the adults, all the way up to the elderly. Do you think Londoners should have to live in fear of crime? That's my question for you. Do you think it's right that 100 of our own teenagers have been killed in the streets since our current mayor took office? Do you think the current mayor should take responsibility for the massive increase in crime on his watch? And then finally, I want you to tell me, do you think the mayor's defunding the police strategy is the solution for all of this, and if not, why? So please type those answers in. I'm getting all of the feeds here from Instagram to Facebook to Twitter to also YouTube. So please type your questions in. I'm going to be reading your answers back to you and giving you my thoughts on those. Before we get started, I want to say this. I don't believe in people bringing problems to the table. I believe that people should bring solutions. And so when learning all of the problems that our city faces right now, it's very easy to criticize. There's a critic on every corner. Everyone will tell you what's wrong with this city, but very few will step up and give solutions and step up and say, I am willing to execute on these solutions. And so many months ago, after seeing everything that was going wrong in the city of London, a city I love, a city I've lived in for 20 years, I thought, you know what? I'm going to stop criticizing and I'm going to start offering solutions. And I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to stand up and say, guess what? I'm willing to put my life on hold, my business on hold, everything on hold, and become your next mayor of London. And I realize there's nothing easy about this job, and I realize there's criticism, and it's not an easy job. But I know that the way it's currently being executed is a disservice to all of us. And that's why I plan to be your next mayor of London. And so on May 7th, I promise I will move into City Hall and I will start making some of these critical changes when it comes to knife crime, crime in general, and supporting our Metropolitan Police. And so that's why I've decided to run, and I will stand as your next mayor of London. And on May 7th, we will start solving these problems. You mark my word on that. So let's begin. First of all, knife crime is at nightmare proportions. And you can see this recent article from The Telegraph that says exactly that. It said that our current mayor, Sadiq Khan, is criticized for tackling knife crime as the 100th teenager killed during his time as mayor. And here's another headline from the Mail Online, and I'm going to read this one out. And this says, quote, blood was pouring out of him. He was screaming, why has this happened to me? Plumber, who was the first on scene of London's stabbing, reveals agony of one of 4 random victims of a 14-hour knife rampage. This is the thing that happens in our capital city every day. And when I go into the article from The Telegraph, it talks about some of the things that have been happening. And it said 3 weeks ago, another teenager was fatally stabbed during a fight in Maida Vale in West London. Of the teenagers who have been killed in Khan's time in office, 2 were only 14 years old, while 9 of them were 15 and 16-year-olds. And one of our politicians, Ian Duncan Smith, said, Sadiq Khan is, quote, a man whose irrelevance is only matched by his incompetence when he is called on to make decisions like this. He went on to say that, quote, he said he would reduce crime only for London to witness an epidemic in gang violence, resulting in the senseless deaths of young people and the growth of a culture of criminality. Another politician chimed in and said, quote, 100 teenagers have died since Sadiq Khan became mayor. That's 100 mums who can no longer hug their children or see them grow up. And went on to say, quote, this is a shocking trend. Knife crime rose by 38% in the year prior to lockdown. Homicides are at an 11-year high. And Sadiq Khan's response is to defund the police by £110 million. And I'll get into that shortly. And he went on to say, quote, it's a terrible indictment of Sadiq Khan. Londoners deserve a safer, fair, and more affordable city. If Sadiq Khan won't deliver, then he should step aside for someone who can. Let's look into the numbers, because they say everything. And again, I am a big fan of the numbers and the statistics and the science. If you can prove it by the numbers, then it's true. Everything else is opinion and conjecture. And let's look at these numbers. And you can see from this graph on screen the number of knife crimes recorded in London from 2010 to 2020. And if you look at this bar chart, you can see as we go from 2011 to 12 to 13 to 14 to 15, knife crime is going down. From 14,000 cases to 11,000 cases, down to 10,000 cases, down to less than 10,000 cases. And right around when our current mayor is elected, you see them jump to 12,000 cases, 14,000 cases, and this year now topping over 15,000 knife crime cases in this city. There it is. In black and white, the numbers don't lie. And this report goes on to say, quote, it is undeniable that the cuts in both police funding and officer numbers are important factors. But the problem with this is that it's not just numbers. These are real human beings. They're actually teenagers that are dying in our streets every single week. and I want to show some of their names. So this is an article that was published in The Sun this year, and it goes on to say, lawless London, London stabbings, the latest news on knife crime, attacks, and statistics. And I want to talk to you about some of the victims, because these are real people. These are children that belong to families. They have mothers, they have fathers. On January 27th this year, Lewis Johnson, who was 16 years old, was stabbed in front of shocked commuters during evening rush hour at East Croydon Station in southeast London. Less than 2 weeks later, on February 5th, a 19-year-old boy was stabbed in a knife fight on Kingsley Road in Hounslow in West London. Met Police confirmed a man in his early 20s and a 15-year-old boy were arrested on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm with intent. Teenage on teenage violence. It's unacceptable. On the same day, February 5th, a horrified dock walker discovered 15-year-old Babakar Diagne stabbed to death on grassland in Coventry. And on February 5th, the 16-year-old victim was rushed to hospital after being stabbed in broad daylight in Upmarket Highgates. Those are 3 teenage stabbing deaths in the same day on February 5th of this year. And the article goes on to say this, quote, London's knife crime explosion has fueled the capital's highest murder rate in more than a decade. It goes on to say, quote, 10 people on average are caught with blades every day in the streets of London. Every day, 10 people are caught with blades. How many more are carrying them? And politician Rakia Ismail, who was formerly of the Labour Party, the same party of the current mayor of London, accused our current mayor of, quote, failing to take action against knife crime, which she said has risen to, quote, by, quote, 34% since he took office in 2016. Our current mayor's own members of his party are calling him up on his poor performance on knife crime. This is a real topic, and these are real teenagers dying in the streets. And you can't point the finger when teenagers are killing teenagers. You have to look at what the society is doing. How are we failing these young kids when they are killing each other with knives right in front of us on the streets of our city that we love? It's unacceptable. And we have to think about what our leaders are doing, what our police officers are doing, what are our policies, and what are our priorities. And that's why, as your next mayor of London, this is going to be very high on my list as one of the first things I do on May 7th. And so, look, I want to hear from you. I want to get your thoughts on all of this. Do you fear knife crime, and why? Please tell me in the comments. Should Londoners have to live in fear of crime? Answer that question for me. Tell me, do you think it's right that 100 of our teenagers have been murdered on our streets in the capital city? Do you think our current mayor should take responsibility for the massive increase in knife crime and overall violent crime? And do you think the mayor's strategy of defunding the police is the solution? And if not, why? And as you're answering those questions, I want to play for you a piece of video that was on television, and it's Piers Morgan, one of the hosts of one of the morning shows here, and his co-host, getting very emotional about this topic. And Piers grew up in London for a large portion of his life, and so did his co-host. And you can see how much they care and how frustrated they are about the lack of the performance of our mayor. And it's an important piece to watch. So here's Piers Morgan asking hard questions of our mayor about stabbing in London.
In the last 5 days, 4 people, including 3 young men, have been stabbed to death in your city on your watch. Why is it not fair to say that you are failing in your mission? You're talking about 2 incidents. I've just said to you there have been 4 knife murders in London, in South London, in a particular part of your city in the last 5 days. Not 2, 4, right? And I think that we are entitled, as I've been a Londoner most of my adult life. I've lived in South London, around actually where at least 2 of these stabbings happened. Susanna lives in that area, right? So we feel personally invested in this. We've got 6 sons between us who've walked around those streets. And every parent in South London right now who's had that experience and has children is now frightened. They're frightened of their kids getting caught up in this. And again, I say to you, what are you doing about it? Your Twitter feed has been full in the last few days of keeping Londoners safe is my top priority as mayor. Our new violence reduction unit brings together experts, blah, blah, blah. It's all good words, but if people are getting stabbed on an almost daily basis to death in this city, We expect more from you as the mayor. What are you going to do to stop this carnage?
Knife crime has surged by 16% in the capital. On Thursday, a 15-year-old boy was stabbed. Honestly, I can't talk about it. I can't talk about it without getting upset. Got children the same age, in the same part of London. 15-year-old boy was stabbed to death. Just gone out to buy some chicken. On Friday night, a 17-year-old boy was at a tube station, stabbed to death. My kids are out on Clapham Common that afternoon. How can I possibly say to them, it's safe for you to be out? I can't talk to them about a task force and things are being done. Teenagers cannot go out in that part of London without worrying that they might get hurt. And the evidence is that they really could. What can parents say to their teenagers? We're talking about children, 15 and 17 years old. We're talking about children. We're not talking about adults with weapons. We're talking about children who have died. What arrests have been made in those cases? That's what I want to be able to tell my children. That those people responsible for those deaths are now they're arrested and they're being investigated and they're going to be brought to justice.
But what you're not doing, Mr. Mayor, is you're not stopping the homicides. And this is my problem with it. And I'm afraid it's, we've had you on a number of times and you keep making promises and you keep talking about units and plans and this sort of philosophy of stopping this violence.
These are officers.
Yeah, but the problem is that it keeps happening.
And
so
it's on the
clearly,
rise.
whatever tactics you're deploying, whatever your strategy is, it is demonstrably failing. If 4 people in one part of South London are stabbed to death in 5 days, in the last 5 days, your strategy for tackling knife crime in the capital city is clearly failing. Do you accept that?
No, Piers. Well, if you
And you can see how emotionally charged this issue is. We really want answers when our leadership cannot give solutions to our own teenagers dying on our streets. And I think it's right to ask those hard questions. And, after almost 5 years in office, not to see any results and to actually see it getting worse, it's unacceptable. And it needs to change, and it will change on May 7th or May 6th. Just reading some of your comments, and I appreciate them. Please type your comments in. I'm getting them here on all the platforms. I've got Candy Lynn on Instagram that says, quote, "It's the world these kids are born into and the traumas they are considered normal. It is an absolute travesty to our children." I agree. This normal is not acceptable. Jacona on IG says, "God bless Diamola Taylor." Thank you. You are right. Diamola Taylor, you are correct. Harry Thomas on YouTube says, quote, "We should take long-term approaches rather than defunding, which has clear correlation with a rise in crime. Instead of defunding them, train them further, just like any other job." I couldn't agree with you more, Harry. And part of my plan, which I want to share at the end of this, is to support the Met Police with real-world training strategies. These officers get literally hours of training every few years, and they need support from our government, especially in this topic. Elias Norris says, quote, "The only solution is education." I appreciate that. Francesca Colombo says, quote, "Educate the police." And again, we believe in this as well, and we have specific policies that I want to share with you later. Night Owl on Instagram says, quote, "It's complex. Boys want to become men, but few teachers and elders show them the way." I couldn't agree more. We need better leadership. We need to support our communities with that and support our police. But leadership starts at the top, and it starts with our mayor. And it's not happening right now. Heather on Instagram says, quote, "I'm a mother of 2 teenage boys. We live in Islington. This is a huge problem. My children tell me their friends carry weapons to protect themselves out of fear of being attacked. We need more police!" Explanation point. Heather, I really appreciate you sharing that as well. And that's the problem, is that there's so much fear out there, and our mayor has failed us in such a high degree that children are carrying knives for their own protection, which of course leads to more knife crime. So this problem can grow exponentially if it's not paid attention to. And our current mayor of London has completely ignored this. He's been taken to task on this year after year after year, not only failed to deliver results, failed to deliver a solution, but it's increased. Knife crime has increased. But it's not just knife crime increased, it's overall violent crime that has increased. And I want to talk about that now. First, I want you to see this headline, which comes from The Express, and that is noting that violent crime in London surging under Sadiq Khan, claims this new damning report. And let me give you some details on that. That report claims that crime rates within London have increased extensively since Sadiq Khan took office 3 years ago. The report says, quote, instead of demonstrating leadership on this issue, Sadiq Khan continues to adopt a quote-unquote not me gov attitude. Quote, he has repeatedly blamed central government for his failure to deal with rising crime and has pointed his finger even further afield with knife crime. Quote, amongst other things, the mayor has attempted to blame drill music, the middle classes, and even boredom for the rise in knife crime. And the report goes on to claim, Mr. Bacon claims a City Hall amendment identified nearly 83 million pounds worth of wasteful spending, which he claims could have been invested into 1,738 extra police officers for the capital, but this was categorically rejected by our mayor, Mr. Khan. And this goes on to say, quote, Sadiq Khan tries to avoid blame by stating that rising crime is a national problem. But Londoners expect the mayor of London to do something rather than wring his hands helplessly and point fingers at other people, unquote. And that has been the story of this current mayor's time in office. Whether it's this year with COVID, or last year with knife crime, or the rise in upsurging crime, or the bailouts of the TfL, he is constantly pointing the finger at someone else, anyone that he can blame. Lately, he points the finger at the national government, the Conservative Party, the former mayor, Boris Johnson. Real leaders step up and take ownership, and they offer solutions to the problem. And that's not what we're seeing here. I want to show you some statistics. Again, I'm all about the numbers. The numbers never lie. And I want to show you this graph of crime rate per 1,000 population in London. We're going from 2010 all the way up to 2020. And again, we see a similar trend. Under the previous mayor, we see crime dropping. You see it going down from 2010 to 2012 to 2013 to 2014. And what happens when our current mayor starts taking office? We see crime increasing. 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, breaking 100 crimes per 1,000 people in population. Look at the trend of that graph. It's absolutely horrific. Do you want another 3 years of that? Do you really want violent crime to continue surging year after year after year? Well, that's what you're going to get if you decide to stay with the current mayor of London. I want to show you another article coming from the Evening Standard, which says, quote, London crime rising 5 times faster than the rest of England. 5 times faster. And the article goes on to say, quote, crime in London rose 5 times more than the rest of the country last year. It goes on to say, quote, the number of homicides in the capital went up by 23% in the year to April, according to the Office for National Statistics data. And it finishes by saying the rise in crime is unacceptable and can no longer be tolerated by the citizens of London. Again, look at that graph. Violent crime surging every single year under the current mayor of London. And he can go on talk shows, he can go on radio shows, and he can explain how it's not his fault. He can explain how it's the national government's fault. He can tell you that he's putting things into place. He can even put slogans on the side of chicken boxes. But the numbers don't lie. He has failed as your current mayor when it comes to tackling knife crime for our teenagers, when it comes to tackling violent crime for our city, and it's unacceptable. And as your next mayor of London, I recognize one crucial fact. Safety is the key to any great city. It's also the key to any prosperous city because crime acts like a hidden tax on the economy. It hinders growth, it creates uncertainty, and it actually stops investment. So as your next mayor of London, one of my crucial aims is going to be to reduce violent crime in this city because everything else is going to be a benefit because of that. I want to get your thoughts. So tell me right now, do you think it's fair, first of all, that Londoners should have to live in this state of fear? Do you think that we should have to feel that we should have to survive in this current state of fear? Next, I want you to answer this question. Do you think it's right that 100 of our teenagers have been killed in the streets? Do you think the current mayor should take responsibility for the massive increase in crime on his watch? And do you think the mayor's defunding the police strategy is the solution? And if not, and finally, just tell me, do you fear knife crime and why? And do you think Londoners should have to live in fear of crime? And so again, I want to go to your questions and your thoughts here, and I appreciate that. Please type your comments in. I'm getting these live on all of our platforms. We've got someone that just said, quote, kids need their youth clubs back open since they've been closed. Knife crime tripled. I know 2 boys knifed to death this year, and that comes from someone named One Ones. That is an excellent point. We have to support our communities. We have to support our community centers. We have to support our community leadership. I couldn't agree with you more. Will White on Instagram says, quote, we need more simple policing as well as boots on the ground. And I agree with you. I completely agree with you. We have to support our Metropolitan Police, which is why one of my policies, which I want to share at the end, of digitizing police administration will actually cut out a lot of the paperwork that can sometimes waste 4 and 5 hours of a police officer's shift and get them back on the streets. And just their presence alone is going to reduce knife crime. I will show you that. Candy on Instagram says, we need to be supporting our police that view their position as a protector and service to their community. Children should not have to live in fear. Amen to that, Candy. Thank you so much for that comment. Say Adagun on YouTube says, quote, if you want to stop knife crime, we need to make sure the law is more severe on criminals as deterrent. I couldn't agree with more with you, Say, which is why we have a 0 tolerance policy on knife crime, which I want to share with you at the end. Jason Huzaifi on Instagram says, quote, gotta go down to the roots only way. It's a very good point, Jason. We have to start at the root of this problem. The knife crime is the end results of a lack of leadership in the community. And that's why we've got to go down to the root. I agree. We've got to promote positive pathways for our youth in their communities. We've got to start there with a proactive investment there. And I'll talk more about what my plans are there as well. And next we have Shabir on Instagram says, quote, we need new police management, more education systems in place for secondary school, and real support for our parents. And I couldn't agree more. You're completely right, Shabir, which is why I'll soon be launching what I'm calling my Family First Policy Framework. And I'll share more about how that family structure is really going to improve our youth. It's going to make them more responsible, more accountable, and I'll get into that more shortly. Finally, Ringen Constitutional on YouTube says, quote, the current mayor looks like a deer in the headlights. The current mayor looks like a deer in headlights. Ringen, I couldn't agree with you more. Every time, and you can see this on any YouTube interview that you see with him, every time he's asked these hard questions, he dithers. He points the finger at other people. He points the finger at other causes and other problems, but the numbers don't lie. Look at those 2 graphs that I just showed you. Knife crime, up every single year our current mayor is in office. Violent crime, every single year is up. Every year our mayor is in office. And what is his solution to all of this? And now I want to make my third and final point. His solution is to defund the police. And you can see this headline here that just recently appeared. And I'll read it out for you. It says, Sadiq Khan announces £500 million cuts plan to London Underground, Met Police, and the London Fire Brigade. And that plan is to defund the police with the latest budget cuts. It's the equivalent of 1,861 full-time salaried officers. Let me ask you, do you think taking nearly 2,000 officers off the streets are going to make those graphs go down? Or do you think they're going to make them go up and up and up? And I want to quote from that article that says, quote, Sadiq Khan has announced a plan to cut City Hall's costs by up to £500 million. Policing, London Fire Brigade, and Transport for London are all set to see significant reductions in their budget over the next 2 years. And that includes that plan I mentioned to defund the police by £110 million. I want to show you another headline that says police in England and Wales are now facing a new era of austerity. This is something that our current mayor is promoting. Austerity for the same police force that is allowing our teenagers to die on the streets. And the article goes on to quote, the mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has warned the funding crisis endangers the government's pledge to recruit 20,000 extra police officers to fight crime and risks leaving the police, quote, with one hand tied behind their back. The article goes on to say, quote, Khan, who as mayor of London oversees the largest force, the Metropolitan Police, warned the shortfall, quote, could jeopardize our ability to tackle violent crime at this crucial juncture. You think, Mayor? Do you think you defunding them would actually hurt their ability? Of course it would. And the article goes on to say, quote, in a letter sent to the Home Secretary, Khan warned of a, quote, new era of austerity for police with frontline officer numbers under threat, and the danger of crime rising. Of course it's going to rise. But I kept doing my research, and it's not just this year that your current mayor of London has been crippling the police force. And the more I go into these numbers, the more it sickens me to see what is actually happening and how it's affecting our children dying on our streets. Back in 2018, the current mayor was forced to admit that the number of police officers per head of population in London was at the lowest point in 20 years, and that police spending per head had fallen faster in London than any other police force on his watch. Quote, City Hall data shows that in 2010, the Metropolitan Police had 4.1 officers per 1,000 Londoners. But that ratio has now dropped to 3.3 officers per 1,000. It's at the lowest point for 20 years. And this is something that's not spoken about. As the population of London has increased from 7 million to 9 million, even if you increase the number of officers, the officers per 1,000 citizens will go down. And this is at the lowest point in 20 years. In addition, we've also seen the largest reduction nationally at 20% here in London compared to 6% across the country. London now has the lowest number of police officers per capita than any city in the UK. Let me repeat that. London now has the lowest number of police officers per capita than any city in the UK. No wonder violent crime is going up. No wonder knife crime is going up. So how can the mayor expect safer streets if you're going to spend less on police? Just do the math. It's simple. The worst part of this whole situation is while all this is happening, the mayor is pointing the finger. He blames the national government. He blames the police. He blames music. He blames boredom. And meanwhile, it's you and I that suffer. Because we go out into the streets, we fear for our own lives. Our children fear for their own lives. Our children are forced to arm themselves with knives because they fear for their own lives. And then the cycle of knife violence continues and continues and continues. We're 20 years from the anniversary of that shocking killing of a 10-year-old boy here in the streets of London when he was walking home from school. What have we done since then? Very little. And our current mayor of London has done even less. And so I want to get your final questions before I move to my concluding and my solutions I want to offer to you. Do you think, or do you fear knife crime in London, and why? And do you think it's fair for us Londoners to live in fear of knife crime? Do you think it's right that 100 of our teenage children have been murdered on the streets under the current mayor's watch? Do you think that the current mayor should step up and take responsibility for this massive increase in violent crime and in death? And do you think the mayor's defunding the police solution is the right solution, and why? I want to go to your questions. This is the last time I want to get your questions. But again, wherever you are in the world right now, type in your thoughts. This is a problem that doesn't just happen in London. But if we can solve this problem here in London, I think we can be an example for the rest of the world. And I appreciate the comments coming in here. And I know there's a lot of emotion here, and I appreciate that. I've got Adam on Instagram that says, quote, social media is a big influencer. It needs to be turned into a tool of benefit and programs for the better. And I appreciate that. And we've been doing this here on London Real for the past 9 years, trying to put out positive messages on our platforms that have now been watched over 500 million times. And so I agree, social media is an excellent place to start with this messaging. And that's what we do here at London Real. And I plan on using this platform to continue putting these messages out to the 9 million citizens here in London, including the children, and to people throughout the world. Viri Dissent on Instagram says, quote, I fear for my life every time I go to university in London. Imagine that, a university student fearing for his life every time he walks out the door to go to school. This is shocking. This is unacceptable that a great city like London is suffering from something as disgusting as knife crime. I can't believe it. It embarrasses me to live in this city, the fact that it's being run that way. Lance Alfonso says, hundreds of our young people killed on the streets. We need more boots on the ground. I couldn't agree more, Lance. And yet our current mayor of London is trying to take police off the streets, and he's blaming others for that lack of responsibility. Unacceptable. Babul on YouTube says, quote, when you defund the police, you allow corruption to take over. Police need to be protected and funded to the max. They are our frontline workers. I couldn't agree with you more, Babul. We need to support the Metropolitan Police with more training and better protocols. We need to go into our communities and start working proactively in the communities and give these younger people new options and new opportunities. And I want to get into that shortly. Lito's World on YouTube says, quote, "We love you, Brian. I hope you become mayor. You actually care. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lito." And again, this stuff makes me very emotional. It's been an emotional week for me. Just to see how, one man can cause the deaths of so many young people just by a lack of leadership, a lack of ownership, a lack of science-based decisions, and just a lack of action. It's really, really hard for me to watch. Candy Lynn on Instagram says, "Brian, it has been such a blessing to watch you evolve over the years and continue to step up into roles that positively impact humanity. These kids need better leadership. Brian for mayor." Thank you so much, Candy. And I promise, as your next mayor of London on May 7th, we are going to start making changes and we will find solutions to these problems. I promise that to you. Cosmic Madman on Instagram says, quote, "Thank you for all that you do. I appreciate Cosmic. We're going to do this together. Trust me. And I'm going to need the help of every citizen in London to make this happen. And I will call on you once I become mayor." Aisha on Instagram says, quote, "I'm voting for you, Brian. So blessed to have you." Thank you, Aisha. I appreciate your support. Diane on Instagram says, quote, "Thank you for rising up to do the task." Quote, or hashtag Brian for mayor. Thank you, Diane. I appreciate your support. And Khan on Instagram, I'm guessing that's not our mayor, says, quote, "We need more police like you, Brian. More people like you, Brian. Hashtag Brian for mayor." Thank you, Khan. I appreciate that. And finally, Tatiana on Instagram says, quote, "London Real has made me see the truth. Thank you." And thank you, Tatiana, honestly, for tuning in. And again, it's my honor to be able to serve you and put out this information every day. I feel energized just to have the opportunity to put this information in front of you and allow you to make these decisions. And again, don't take my word for it. Go look through my graphs. Go look through my sources. Go look through the data. Google search this stuff. Watch the interviews of our current mayor. All this stuff is available on national statistics and websites, and you can find all of this stuff yourself. Make your own decision. And finally, I want to conclude with this. One of my key policies as your next mayor is to make London safe again. And you can read all about this policy on my website. I go into it on detail, and I want to tell you exactly how I plan to do this. And I've spent months and months researching how I can make London safe again. And I've had to make some difficult decisions. And a lot of people in the world are saying that you should defund the police, including our current mayor. And I disagree with that strategy. I think we need to invest in the police and give them more training protocols. And I want to tell you exactly how I plan to make London safe again as your next mayor starting on May 7th next year. First of all, I want to support the Metropolitan Police with more situation-based training protocols designed for the officers to role play a wide variety of situations so they are better equipped to deal with the ever-changing landscape of policing. This includes knife crime on the streets, speaking with teenagers that carry knives, speaking with teenagers that have been involved in violence. We've got to support the Metropolitan Police so they know how to deal with a lot of the actions that happen there on the police, from domestic violence to violent crime to everything. They have got a very difficult job. We need to invest more in this police force. Second, I want to enforce a zero tolerance policy for knife crime and possession. Zero tolerance for knife crime and possession. Everyone needs to know it's no longer acceptable to do that. And I want to ensure that all offenders are prosecuted to the letter of the law with no exceptions. Third, I want to use less invasive approaches by adopting new innovative solutions to promoting a knife crime-free city. There are solutions that aren't invasive, where you can scan groups of people to find out if knives are being carried. We can use this on a mass scale, and we can provide better results than our current mayor. Fourth, and this is a very, very important one, I want to pursue new community-led crime prevention strategies. I want to address the cause of crime. That's the problem that no one's talking about here. What's the cause of these crime? Rather than simply focusing on the outcomes of these crimes. And I want to launch new programs that offer our young people positive pathways, positive options in their communities, and address the issues that they face every day, like gang culture and the exploitation of our children through county lines. And we know that's a big problem right now in our communities, and we've got to address it on the ground level. That's going to prevent the violent crime and the knife crime. Next, I want to digitize the Metropolitan Police by creating a paperless, data-driven solution that brings cost reductions while also employing better technology and advanced AI solutions to solve crime. This will really make a massive difference. A lot of our officers spend chunks of their day on paperwork. we can literally streamline that process, digitize it, and we can get boots back on the ground and get these police officers in the street with a police presence that's going to help us solve crime. And lastly, I want to implement an ambitious diversity representation strategy in our Metropolitan Police. Our police officers need to represent the communities they police in everything. They need to represent them in their races, their religions, their genders. They must proportionally represent the communities that they police. This will solve a lot of our problems. The communities need to know that it's their own people policing them. That's the only way that we're going to have this dialogue, that we can all solve these problems together. And so that is my strategy on making London safe. If you want to know more details about my policy, you can go to brianformayor.london. I have details on every single one of my policies, every single one, on how we can get London back to work immediately, how we can put our health first, how we can put science first, how we can put education first, how we can put family first, which by putting family first is also going to solve some of these problems in our communities. When these children don't have family structures, even single parent structures can be incredible. My mother raised 3 children as a single parent, as a divorced mother, and she did a great job. We can support these structures, but the family structure is crucial when it comes to supporting these children. So very important part of my policy. And again, we need to give these young people new alternatives. When London is not working, these children don't have opportunities. Getting London back to work means getting children and their parents back to work, which means money is coming in, food is on the table, there's opportunities for entrepreneurship, there's jobs for these kids. We need to give them options. And this is all part of my Transform London 2021 plan of attack. Again, I've spent a lot of time on detailed policies. I am confident these policies will work, but they all need to be done together. We need to get London back to work. We need to make London safe. We need to put science first. We need to put our health first. We need to put our family first. We need to put transport first. It all works together in a 360-degree strategy. But I am confident that this new leadership will solve the problems that we're currently facing. Because what we see now, and you could see by these statistics, is we see a mayor that has failed us. We see a mayor that year after year lies to us. He tells us he's going to solve the problem. He tells us no more are our children going to die on the streets from knife crime. And yes, more die every single year. Violent crime goes up every single year. And what does he say about it? He blames the national government. That's all he does. He blames others for his problems. Real leaders own their decisions. They own the results. And they show ways forward to solve those problems. And that's what I plan on doing as your next mayor of London. I appreciate all the support here. I appreciate all the energy from people coming around the world. And I want to say one final thing. The problems we face as a city in London, they're serious problems. We have come to a point because this city has been run into the ground by our current crop of politicians. It's going to take very serious effort, not just from me as your next mayor of London, but from every single one of the citizens of this city. We're going to have to work together. I'm going to need your help in your communities. I'm going to need you to be looking around that community. I might need you to have a word with one of the teenagers on the block that might be straying. I'm going to need you to have a word with one of the teenagers who might be in fear that day, or one of the teenagers who might be thinking about carrying a knife, and you're going to have a word and say, guess what? There's new solutions. There's other opportunities. We are going to solve these problems together. We're going to support our police, and we're going to lead this city in a new direction. And I'm confident that with my policies and with all of us working together, that we can make this city I love world-class once again. So again, this is the 20-year anniversary of the shocking death of that 10-year-old boy who was walking home that day on his way to school and suffered a knife crime death by a group of other teenagers. And so to Damiola Taylor and your family, I want to send out our support, our love, and I want to promise you that as your next mayor of London, I will solve this problem of knife crime in London. I will solve this problem of violent crime increase. I will stop defunding the police, and I will bring solutions so we don't have to read about these headlines anymore. And our teenagers, our children, and our citizens can walk the streets in safety. I promise you that. So thank you so much for your time. These are serious issues. They deserve serious consideration. Please leave your comments below. Tell me what you think. Again, make the decision for yourself. Look into the data yourself. But I'm confident that you're going to come to similar conclusions. We need a change in leadership. Let's move forward, and let's take London in a new direction. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day. At London Real, we believe that individual transformation can change the world. Join us and start your journey today.